Sup y'all, and welcome to the Geography of Industry and Services, Part 5. In this video, we're going to continue looking at the global division of labor by asking this essential question: what forces and changes have led to the modern global division of labor? Prior to the economic structure of the modern world, Fordism was the dominant configuration, featuring mass production at a single site. Since the conclusion of World War II, post-Fordism is what dominates global production and trade. Also referred to as the post-industrial economy, it highlights flexible production in which firms are able to choose between a plethora of competing suppliers. Multinational corporations shift production around the world, but especially with countries relatively close to each other. Now, multinational corporations, or MNCs for short, are those registered or operated in more than one country. The first one in history was the British East India Company, which was first chartered in 1600. Transnational corporations, or TNCs, are mostly synonymous with MNCs, but they are so globalized they have no single national home. Examples include Mitsubishi, Walmart, General Motors, and ExxonMobil. These international companies are only increasing in number. Back in 1970, there were around 7,000 TNCs. Today, there are estimated to be over 100,000. The trend has been for MNCs and TNCs to not only grow in number, but also grow in size. This graphic shows you that 10 MNCs control most of the consumer brands we buy. Parent companies like Kraft, Coca-Cola, Nestle, and Kellogg's have expanded through vertical and horizontal integration. For example, PepsiCo owns restaurants like Taco Bell, KFC, and Pizza Hut, as well as brands like Pillsbury, Lay's, and Tropicana. This graphic shows how 37 banks in 1990 have been bought out or merged down to 4 banks by 2010, horizontally integrated into Citigroup, JP Morgan Chase, Bank of America, and Wells Fargo. And here you see how 6 media giants control most of cinema, television, radio, and even print. Household names like GE, Time Warner, CBS, and Disney, which owns ABC, ESPN, Pixar, and others. MNCs and TNCs develop goods through what is known as a product life cycle. Look at the iPhone that was commodified and introduced in 2007, selling 1.39 million units in that year. Since then, it experienced immense growth, with 125 million sold in 2012 and maturing in 2015 with 231 million sold. However, 2016 represented the first year since its inception in which its sales declined, down slightly to 212 million. It may not represent a continuing trend, but no product lasts forever. Many products spawn other products, and sometimes even entirely new industries. The App Store opened in 2008 and had around 800 in that year. By 2012, there were over 700,000 apps. In 2015, that number swelled to 1.5 million. And by 2016, it has continued to grow to over 2 million. Corporations still engage in mass production, but it is handled differently than during the Fordist era. In some circles, it is referred to as lean production, which was first pioneered by Toyota back in the 1980s. Most corporations seek to reduce cost and waste associated with mass production. With the old model, there was an excessive inventory locked away in vast warehouses, overproduction of goods, even in the face of changing demand and copious numbers of defects. With more modern methods of production, corporations use just-in-time delivery, keeping the parts and components they need for short-term production. This reduces the amount of in-process inventory needed and cuts costs. Certainly, modern transportation and communication technologies have made this possible. In the post-Fordist world, if companies always stay put in the same location, they can become less efficient due to changing costs and demand. MNCs and TNCs establish a spatial fix by moving production from one site to another based on the place-based cost advantages of the new location. This graphic shows how the Caterpillar company can have its trucks used in Australia to transport iron ore that is shipped to China in order to make steel at a relatively low cost. That steel is then shipped to the United States to process the steel into truck parts, which are then shipped to Australia and then assembled on site. And round the process continues. This helps illustrate the global division of labor, which in part involves the spatial shift of manufacturing industries from MDCs to NICs and LDCs. Keep in mind, this has all been possible through a convergence of a myriad of factors, including transport infrastructure, containerization, technological innovations, and lower tariff rates. The locations of production concentrate around resource and transport nodes. Depending on what is being produced and other variables such as resources, the local labor pool, available infrastructure, and changing demand. Nodes are connection points in a network, and since the world today is changing so rapidly, MNCs and TNCs need to be flexible in order to survive and thrive. Nodes are important as sites of production, as you see with certain locations for the design, development, and manufacturing of different parts that go into creating an iPhone. Nodes can also be important places of distribution along a network, such as this map that highlights the distribution centers for Walmart stores in the US. Notice how they are distributed across the American landscape, with greater concentrations in the more dense and wealthy population centers, and more dispersed in other areas. Unfortunately, globalization does not always lead to positive results. Who would think that something so mundane as cobalt mining could lead to something so sinister? In 2016, according to an Amnesty International report, while around half of the world's cobalt comes from the Democratic Republic of Congo, children as young as 7 years old are not only working in some mines, but often laboring in unsafe conditions. This is significant because at least one mining company based in China trades cobalt to tech firms such as Apple, Microsoft, and Samsung, among other MNCs and TNCs. And these companies use the metal in their batteries. While these firms may be dedicated to the responsible sourcing of raw materials, this map and this example shows the complex nature of the global division of labor. Now back to the United States, starting around the time of the Great Depression, factories began to shut down in the major manufacturing belt around the Northeast to the Midwest, and companies looked for new cities and regions in order to build up new factories for cost savings. This led to the development of the Rust Belt and the relocation of many manufacturing centers into the southern states, which is often called the Sun Belt. And this is an example of outsourcing, which is the moving of individual steps in the production process of a good or service to a supplier who offers a cost savings. As stated before, in the post-Fordist global economy, many MNCs and TNCs shift production to new locales in order to reduce cost and increase profit. While many of these new locations may be within a country, other locations outside of the country may prove to offer a greater cost savings. This is known as business processing outsourcing, or BPO, also commonly referred to as offshoring. Since transportation and communication costs have declined so much, usually the most expensive part of production is the labor cost. So a term we can also introduce is global sourcing, which is essentially the same thing as offshoring. Firms search the global market for goods and services across geopolitical boundaries. This is why a great deal of low-cost labor-intensive manufacturing is outsourced to countries like China or Mexico, why many call centers are outsourced to low-cost English-speaking regions like the Philippines or India, and why some programming and coding is outsourced to countries in Eastern Europe with lower labor costs. But don't forget, in the global division of labor, most trading is actually with closer neighbors, where economies of scope works best. In fact, the word near-sourcing has entered the lexicon to describe outsourcing to proximate countries in order to maximize just-in-time delivery and short-term production. USA's top trading partners are China, Canada, Mexico, Japan, and Germany, in that order. What this shows is that while closer countries are more likely to trade, the size of national economies is also exceptionally influential. According to GDP, China is number 1 in the world, while Japan and Germany are numbers 4 and 5, respectively. China does a better job of showing the tendencies of the global division of labor. Its top trading partners are the United States, Hong Kong, which is technically part of China but maintains some autonomy, and these are followed by Japan, South Korea, and then Germany. And to finish, the benefits of modern technology and the new international division of labor can be seen in this ad from Radio Shack back in 1991. Virtually everything offered in this advertisement that had to be bought separately is now found on every smartphone, plus a bevy of other functions not possible at that time, such as easy access to the World Wide Web, which had only just been invented in that same year. If all the manufacturing of components and assembly took place entirely in the US, a typical smartphone would likely be more than 3 times the current price.